Good morning, partners in crime. It's great to see you today. I am so happy to welcome Linda Richards with us today. Hi, Linda.
Hello, good morning.
Now, Linda is the author of over a dozen books. She's won many awards. She's the founder and publisher of January Magazine and a contributing editor to the crime fiction blog, The Rap Sheet. She's best known for her strong female protagonists in the thriller genre. She's from Vancouver, Canada, and currently is in Phoenix, Arizona. So it's great to have you with us today, even though we
Super,
have like major time difference between the two of us.
right. Well,
So
not as much as if we were in the UK. So,
that's a, um, so we're here to talk about your newest book, um, Insensible Loss. But before we get into that, can we talk a little bit about the full series? And it's called the Ending series, right?
it is.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, sure. And we had a tough time coming up with a name for this series because I've written three series and I never intended any of them to be series. I had a wonderful idea in each case. I thought a wonderful idea for a book and started writing it, writing the book from my heart. And in the process of writing that book, thinking about what other things, could happen, or maybe even sometimes things were happening that were beyond the scope of that particular book. And so suddenly you've got a series, and you've got a series without a name. So that first book is called Endings, and it came out in 2021. And that's actually the one that's optioned for by a major studio for series production.
So exciting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I'm hoping that after this many books, I'm about to be an overnight sensation. Um, but in that book, the main character loses, I mean, she basically loses her life. She doesn't die, but everything in her life disappears from it in a really tragic way. And she finds herself so circumstances lead her to becoming a contract killer, which is, doesn't seem like a natural progression from suburban housewife and to killing people for money. And it kind of came out of, in a short story I wrote prior to that, it kind of came out of me musing what would have to happen in my life, in like a normal person's life, for them to kill someone for money. And I have not killed people for money or otherwise, but somehow this tragedy took hold in my heart. And when I read from that first book, like at live events, I often cry. It's really personal material for me in unexpected ways.
Yeah, it's amazing to me. Can you tell us a little bit about your main character?
She's so okay. So I wrote this short story, and I would read from it. I was doing like a lot of noir at the bar events because my stuff tends to be a little noir, and it was a set piece. It was short, and again, I would sometimes cry while I was reading, and it was like powerful. It was clear that it was powerful material to me. And my colleagues, other authors, would say, "Linda, that's got to be a book," and I'm like. I mean, it's like somebody going around killing people. It's been done. It's not really that interesting. I think I did it in the short story. And one friend in particular, novelist Dietrich Kaltheis said, Linda, that's not it's not about her going around killing people. It's about her redemption. And we were coming back actually from a book tour that we were doing together. And by the time I got home, I was just like ready to dive onto my computer and start doing it because yes, it is this the beleaguered character who is now killing people for money, but it's about her stumbling towards the light, really. It's really about hope. All of the books have at their core, there's a darkness, but also there's a light and stumbling towards redemption.
As I was prepping this morning for our interview, I reread the first chapter of the book, and it's so emotional, her grief and her thought process, and to see that you really bring out those feelings the despair, but the hope, but the grief, and like pull it all together.
Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so there's a sort of a distance to the prose. I don't know if you've read anything of mine outside of this series, but my tone tends to be really different for every project. I don't think about it, like I don't manipulate it, it's just there. And for this series, there's a distance. It's first person immediate, which I had never done, and suddenly it was there, and I'm like, okay. So it's all happening right now, but there's also a distance to her voice. And I think partly that comes from the things that she's doing sometimes are really awful. She's doing awful things, and she's obviously damaged goods. She's, again, stumbling towards the light, but she's doing bad stuff. And so the distance, it's like an emotional distance that she has to have to pull this stuff off. But it's a big ask sometimes for readers, and not all readers get it, right? Some readers are kind of deeply offended, and I don't think they even know all the time quite why they're offended, but I can fill you in because I do understand it, and I forgive it. I get it. When you're in first person narration, you're asking your reader to come along for the ride. And I think some people, and she's a likable character, despite even when she's doing this horrible stuff, she's likable. It's not like, like an American Psycho, the main character is detestable. She's actually likable. So you find yourself going along with her. She's killing people sometimes. And if you're liking her, like, what does that say about you? Like, what does that say about me if I'm okay with this? And so you kind of make a subconscious judgment about self sometimes. Not everybody does. Like, some people really get that it's not condoning it, or it's not, it's none of that stuff. But just the emotional journey, it's difficult for some people, and I get that.
Yeah, I can imagine that. That's a really hard, because you're living the story. So you have to walk through it with her.
Yeah.
You're not that third person watching it happen.
Yeah. And I see that reflected like in my Amazon reviews, right? Because like a lot of people it's kind of like they either love it or hate it. Like people aren't really ambiguous about these books. And there's like lots of enthusiasm, and then you'll get one that's like real bad. And I having read enough of them, and there's not a ton, but when you see them, you recognize, yeah, okay, that's not an emotional place that person wanted to come to from, and that's okay.
I think part of what evokes those feelings, though, is that you've chosen not to give her a name.
You know what's funny? It wasn't a choice. It
Really?
was, yeah, and people have asked me, like, what's her name? And I'm like, I do not know. Like, I don't know. She's never told me her name. There was some confusion for some reviewers in, I guess, the third book. I'm going cautiously here because I don't want to give too much away, but in the third book, we discover the name of the person she had taken on initially. Like she had walked away from her life, walked away from her identity, and then she took on somebody else's identity, and that identity, as she's shedding it, is discovered. So I think the character's name was like Virginia or Elizabeth. I don't know, because it was never, to me, it was never her name. But a lot of reviewers were using the name. I was just like, well, it's not who she is. So I think that was the first time that I really got that some people, that's another difficult piece. Like sometimes people were like, well, what is her name? And then having that name attached to her made her realize a lot sometimes, and it's something that I have tried, like with my publicists and stuff, to like not describe it as the nameless heroine or something, which they're starting to do anyway. A lot of reviewers have done that because she's a cipher, right? She almost doesn't exist, and she goes through her life that way. And so that's what the not naming. That was a really long answer to your question, wasn't it? But
No,
that's
it's perfect.
but that's what the not naming was. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was just sort of like the first person immediate.
Mhm.
It wasn't a choice. It was just there. And a lot of my writing's like that. In case you don't know this, or for the writers in the room, I am a pantser. I, you know, I work without a plot and I just move forward. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
So I don't know. I just said I don't know.
no, it's wonderful because it explains a lot because we did the first book tour with book two, and nobody really commented on it, on the fact that she didn't have a name. And in the second book, there weren't really many comments, but I think that they were thinking of her as her borrowed identity.
Right.
Um, but now this one, everybody's like, oh, she doesn't have a name. And I'm like, but she hasn't had a name from the beginning.
She never had a name, and her dog doesn't have a name. Well, her dog actually gets a name in the fourth book. So for
Oh,
those of you who've been following along with the series, the dog gets a name in the fourth book. Yes.
well, can you tell us a little bit about the fourth book and Imogen?
Um, yes. So I've been describing it, and I think you've seen some of this, Gina, as the Secret Garden meets Ripley Underground. And Ripley Underground it's not the best known of Patricia Highsmith's books, but I was reading about it when I was musing on what this book was going to be. Because like in the third book, a lot of people said this is the last book. A lot of reviewers said this is the final book because
Dead
I was
West, yes.
very complete. It was never meant to be. I was already working on the fourth one by the time that book came out. I was almost finished the fourth book, but a lot of people couldn't conceive of how anything else could happen after the third book. So I was like, oh, smooth. I did a good job with that. But so, and when I got to, when I finished the third book, I'm thinking, okay, so I knew that I almost wanted her coming back from, I'm not going to give away the third book, but coming back, what that had been and what was that going to look like. And so while I'm musing on that, and I'm writing already and I'm making notes, I read about Ripley Underground. And so it's, I don't even know which of, like how deeply into the Ripley series that is. But it comes way after the book that we all know real well, which is The Talented Mr. Ripley. It's like maybe book 4 or something. I don't know. But I read about it, and in that book, again, going cautiously, not wanting to give too much away, I know I'm not going to say what that, you can go look that up if you want, or you can read my book, but I thought I knew what Ripley Underground was about, and from reading about it, and I determined I was going to read the book. But first, I was making notes on what elements I was inspired by it, and yeah, I'm dancing. You can hear me here, Gina. I'm dancing between not wanting to give too much away and not giving anything away and not saying anything useful at all. So in Ripley Underground, he has disappeared. The Ripley character has disappeared into a life of somewhat leisure in the country, and then he pretends to be someone else, and people die in the meantime. That is a really bad synopsis, but for the purposes of this conversation, it kind of. And so I started writing that, and not Ripley Underground, but I started writing this character, alone in the world, coming back from what had been almost like a spiritual death at the end of the third book. And she's in the desert in a national park, which, by the way, I made up. That Cathedral National Park does not exist. People have asked me that. I made it up. But it's loosely based on Tonto National Park, which does exist, and it's one of the largest national parks in the United States, and it's here in Arizona. So I made up. It's good having it's convenient having a made up national park, because then I can have physical features be wherever they're convenient for my story. So she's basically wandering around in her old Volvo that's been part of this series since the beginning, and with her dog, who at that point still has no name. And bad things happen, and then she stumbles across this kind of almost desert oasis, and she meets this very old woman who turns out to be an internationally famous artist who's basically hiding out here and has been for the last 30 years, and befriends her, and trouble ensues. So yeah, and so who's manipulating who? That's come up in some of the reviews, and that's been fun. Um, and they have a kind of a spiritual connection, and yeah,
Their friendship is very deep.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so, okay, I want to ask you about these covers. There's not a lot going on the covers, but they're very focused for each book. Can you tell us a little bit about your inspiration for this?
I have no inspiration. I can take no credit for that at all. I have nothing to do with the covers, which is funny. I think I am. My training is as a graphic artist,
Yeah.
but I'm not participating in anything except for saying, ultimately, kind of yay or nay. Ocean View has the grace to give me kind of a final say, which contractually they don't need to. But what they said in the first book, because with the first book especially, we went through a lot of permutations, and I kept on, basically throwing them back. And the publisher at the time said, yeah, well, we want authors to be happy with their covers because you're going to be out there promoting the book, and you don't want to be promoting a book that you're not proud of. So they have been very gracious and kind in letting me kind of have a final say, even though, like I said, I know I don't really. They're the publisher, and they're the ones, paying the bills, so they get to say. So the first book was the first book, and then, which I loved that cover.
Yeah.
And then for the second book, there was a whole bunch of different covers, but the first book had done very well. And I was like, let's keep it in the same theme. So I'm resisting the urge to turn around and look. I've got the books, behind me.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at them.
And so I'm not going to do it. Oh yeah, right. The fingers, right? They've gone with that. Sorry, I'm going to do it. Yeah. Oh yeah, until book 4, and then. There was no cool way of making them look the same. I mean, kind of, I think maybe they had done the fingers thing. I don't know. And so it was the paintbrush, which not everybody.
But that really flows. Doing the hands in the first 3 and then the paintbrush, it really flows well.
That was funny that I had to turn around and look at them. Right? I was like, what do we got? Yeah, the paintbrush. I thought it was great. And on the third book, there's so much about horses. In the third book, it's all around wild horses. And we toyed a lot with covers with horses. But it ended up looking like a Western, which the book is certainly not.
Right.
And so we nearly left the fingers alone for that one. And then when I saw the paintbrush, I was just like, yeah, no, that's it. Not everybody gets right away that that's a paintbrush, but because you see the way they've spattered the red. They did. It's a brilliant job. But I had really nothing to do with it other than going like, and this fourth book was the first one where I saw the first permutation. Went, yeah, that's it. Like they sent a few, but right away everybody liked that one.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah,
and it's perfect for the book.
Yeah. Thanks, but I take no credit other than giving it the big nod. Yeah.
I did that. So now you said you were a graphic artist, but you also are a writer. And
right.
I loved your story of how you started writing on the planes and stuff. So can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I had and I just read that piece this morning, so it's fresh in my memory. But I think my first 10 books. So actually, it's more than a dozen books. I've just been saying that because I was too lazy to count. I finally did count recently because the number changes. It's like, how old are you? Like, I don't know. It's a number that's different every year. And so I actually counted this very recently, and it's 18.
Oh my goodness.
It is over a
That's
dozen.
amazing.
Over a dozen is not lying. because that is certainly 18 is more than a dozen, but yeah, it's 18 if you count like anthologies and things like that. Well, oh, and nonfiction. If I count the anthologies and the nonfiction, it's probably a dozen novels now. Oh, now I have to go count something else. No, but if you count the nonfiction and the anthologies that I've contributed to, it's 18.
Wow. Pretty
Right?
soon you'll be able to say 2 dozen.
I know. I'm going to say, well, now I'm going to say over 18 right now. At least 18. And that's not counting like translations or a different
Yeah.
editions or anything, because that would, but those are the same books. Um, anyway, what was the question? I was answering something. I took myself off on a tangent.
And tell us a little bit about how you got started writing.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, so my first 10 books, thereabouts, I haven't counted that. I wrote on a computer like a normal person. And then got involved with someone, a man who was living at the time. I was living in Vancouver, Canada, and he was living near Palm Beach in Florida. And so I found myself, oh, and also I have family on the Central Coast in California. And for various reasons, I was spending a lot of time there.
Mhm.
And so I was just suddenly constantly on a plane. I mean, prior to this period, I had spent 11 years living on an island off the coast of British Columbia. So I had been pretty much in one spot. And now suddenly I was like always on the move. And I discovered I wrote very happily in public, like in cafes and things like that. But also, I would be when you write on a plane, like they make you put your stuff away like all the time. Like if you're working on a computer, they say, now put away your laptop. You know the drill. And so I got tired of that, and I just started bringing out my notebook. And I would bring it out like as soon, because I was working madly on, and I'm stopping myself. I'm hesitating because I think I might have been working on the first draft of the book that would become endings, maybe part of the time. And so I started working on longhand, and I found myself very quickly connecting with the material in a really more significant way. And actually, since that time, I've lectured on this at universities about, because a lot of, I was going to say kids, but a lot of college students take all their notes on a computer now. And it has been significantly proven that their retention level, like students who do that, score lower than students who don't do that. And it's one of the reasons is, well, one of the reasons is you can actually be on Facebook and stuff while you're taking notes, but you don't connect as significantly with the material. And the biggest way that I've seen that is there's no futzing around. I have either printed out the last page of my manuscript, or I can access it on Google Docs now on my phone, or it's right there in my notebook because I haven't transcribed it yet. And I sit down and I just start to write. When I was doing that lecturing, which is a few years ago now, I had all the reasons and the Harvard studies and stuff, and there are actual real life reasons for that. But how it feels to me, well, it feels a little bit like magic, but it's like how it feels actually is when you're binging a series and
Mhm.
you had to stop in the middle of an episode because you were tired or you had to get a phone call or whatever, and then you pick it up the next day. You don't really have to go back much to get where you were when you were watching the series.
Yeah.
That's what it's like for me. Like when I start writing, I'm right back in, I've turned the television on. And actually, my writing process is, the whole thing is like that. I've described it often, the feeling that I have when I'm working on the first draft of a book. Later on, when you're editing and sanding and stuff, that's a different feeling. But when I'm working on the first draft, it feels like I'm binging a series. It's in high memory, and I can't wait to get back to it.
It's amazing. It just, well, I can't even read my handwriting after I write it, but I do still write it because I remember it if I write it.
Yes, that's one of the things too. So,
Yeah.
right, did I answer the question? So, yeah, I was visiting him and going back and forth. Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah. And that's why I found that answer so profound because I was like, I always write stuff just because I will remember it even if I can't read a word I wrote.
Yes. And are you left-handed?
No, I'm right-handed.
I'm left-handed. I cannot read my writing. I mean, I've gotten maybe better at reading my handwriting, but the other thing that I do, again, when I'm when I'm working on a first draft, if the situation allows, like if I'm not traveling, but I'm just going through my life,
Mhm.
I'll work on the first draft in longhand, and I'll do it wherever. Like I'll do it at my gym, there's like a lounge, or I'll walk to a cafe, and then and I'll work for a while, for a few hours, and then I'll walk from the cafe to a happy hour, and I'll work for a while. And then the next morning, I'll transcribe the things that I did the day before. So that's part of my cycle. And then while I'm transcribing, sometimes even do that in bed, but while I'm transcribing, then more will come. I'll write some of it in on the computer, but then I'll go back to my notebook. Because when I'm transcribing, then it's just moving it ahead kind of naturally, and you think about where you are and where it's going. So maybe add, a few hundred words or whatever. And
Wow,
yeah, it's pretty
that is
fun.
amazing. So, since you're a pantser, do you do a lot of research?
I do. I mean, it depends, right? Some things,
Mhm.
and sometimes I'll do research after. And I was a journalist
Yes.
in a previous life. And so I use TK, which is journalese for to come. I mean, it happens that those two letters don't occur together in the English language in any word. And so copy editors as long as there's been journalists and copy editors.
Yeah.
You put in TK, and then when the copy editor sees that, they know that something's missing. And so whenever, if you're you're missing a name, you need something to go back and research, you put in TK, and then you can find it easily in your manuscript or your story or whatever the case is. So sometimes if I encounter something, I try very hard not to stop, like the
Yeah.
flow or that kind
Mhm.
of thing. So I'll do research on aspects, but then when I'm writing, if you encounter something that then I just put in a TK and I get back to it at a more seemly time, so I'm not interrupting my flow. Again, I'm not on a computer too, so so I can't go research it because I'm trying to not have that.
That's amazing. You're very unique in that process, and I find it just so enlightening.
I think I think well, you mentioned January magazine early on, and this is
Yeah.
not a plug for that, but early in the course of that publication's history, I interviewed about 200 authors, and I like Margaret Atwood, Salman
Mhm.
Rushdie, and I would talk to them about process,
Mhm.
and I was trying to find, I was at that point trying to gain the courage to write a novel, and
Okay.
I don't know that I was consciously looking for the secret to being a successful novelist, but it was sort of where some of those interviews went. Well, just talking about process and what did they do? What were the things that connected really successful authors? And so after all of those interviews, and then I started writing my own books, and there's no time for it. But anyway, in the process, I discovered the secret to the one thing that they all had in common. Did they write with number 10 pencils? Did they do everything on the computer? What did they do that was all the same? And I discovered that the one thing that all of them had done at one point, the only thing that was the same was at one point they had sat in a room by themselves and metaphorically and written a book. And that was the thing that they had all done that I had at that stage not yet done. I mean, I'd written nonfiction books by then, but I hadn't written a novel, which for me at first was a very scary thing. And so my point, where this tangent came from, is that you said my process was unique, but I think everyone's process, our processes are all very unique. And having spoken to many writers about that, and I know you have too, like it's a very different process for all of us. That was
Yeah.
such a a long answer to what was not really a question.
Except for the sitting down and writing it, everybody's process is unique.
Yes, yes. And I
Yeah.
have talked to writers too that like they would only use a number 10 pencil on a notebook. And me, it's just like whatever scrap of paper. At BoucherCon last year, because they have a silent auction always, and they ask
Mhm.
for donations to raise money at BoucherCon, as you know. And last year I donated one of the notebooks that had all of my notes in it from it was for Dead
Wow.
West, which at that point was about to come out. It came out like 3 days after BoucherCon. So I donated like an early copy of the book and this notebook that was all that. And I've only been able to do that once because I usually have like I'll just grab the notebook next to me and I'll start using. But that one I had been very consistent. Maybe I had been traveling a lot. I had been very consistent. It was all Dead West, so I could give that away.
That sounds so cool. And what a memorabilia. That would be amazing, especially if the play comes out, the screenwriting.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to yeah, to be able to do that. But mostly I have like I'll have like I'll write down a recipe. I'll take a and when I'm on a if I'm in a meeting and I'm not totally I doodle. Especially if it's a phone meeting, nobody can see me. I'll finish and my husband will say, that must have been a really boring meeting because there'll be like horses and people's eyes.
That's so cool. All right. So tell me what it is that you enjoy most about writing this particular series.
I think it's a really good and interesting question. What do I enjoy most about it? I don't know that I enjoy it more than the other series I've worked on. It's
Mhm.
fun to be in someone else's head for a bit.
Yeah.
It always is, and not the killing part. She actually doesn't do a lot of killing in this last book. I don't mean that, but the like by now with this character, 4 books in, I'm feeling like she's pretty messed up, like just by the things that have happened. And so getting to an emotional place that's outside of where you are,
Yeah.
being authentic with the emotion, as authentic as you can, because it's not your life. And that's been true of all of the books that I've written from first person, or even not from first person, like getting to an authentic place of emotion. And I think from the feedback I get, readers appreciate that as well. That getting that things don't happen out of sequence emotionally, and there can be coincidence, there can be, but the authenticity of the emotion people relate to, I think. So I kind of dig that, and this I'm just trying to think, was it? Oh no, it's a book that. Oh no, I was like, what book was I working on when I was doing research on attachment theory? And that's not for this book. That's a book that I've not finished. I've not finished final edits on, so I'm not going to talk about it outside of this series. But I did for the character to be completely authentic with what was going on in her life. I actually did some research on attachment theory and family, um, yeah, family attachment theory, I guess. So anyway, I was like,
Wow.
I'm talking about a book that doesn't exist, so I'll stop that now. We'll talk about that some future point, I hope.
Are you planning to attend any conferences in the coming future?
And I've just got well, I mean, BoucherCon next September. That's a ways off. Will be, and that's in New Orleans. I'll probably be in Colorado for Left Coast Crime in March or April. I can't remember when it is now, but it's one of those months. And if there's anything else coming up, I can't think of it right now. But I'll usually mention stuff like that on my website. And
Okay,
if people,
great.
and I have a newsletter, and you can subscribe again on my website. It's really easy, and you don't get a barrage. I'm terribly infrequent with it, so you won't get a whole lot of mail from me.
Just when it's important, which is really what readers want. We want to know when it's important.
Yes, yes,
So, are we working on another book in the ending series?
yes. I'm working on another book in the ending series. That one doesn't have a date right now. I had a lot of stuff going on in my life this year, and have not does not currently, it's not currently in the pipeline, so I'm not going to announce dates on that yet. But there's definitely, she does not die in the end of four.
That's a great news.
Before. No promises for the future. The only promise I've ever made with regards to the series, and it came out of reader mail, and I make this promise whenever I get the opportunity, and that is I will never kill the dog. Like, rest easy, the dog will not die, and he might get into the occasional scuffle, but he won't be badly hurt. Not ever, I promise. Readers are concerned. Readers are really, you can blow up whatever person you want, but leave the dog alone. I know this. So
Yes.
he's a good dog.
Well, thank you for visiting with us today, Linda. We will be on the lookout for you and her dog in very near future. And I will put the links for them to sign up for your newsletter in the show notes so that they can sign up.
Thank you. And thank you for this time together. It's been great chatting with you. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. It is great to talk to you too. And we will talk again soon. Thank you, partners in crime. We will see you again soon.